On the night of the Festival of Lights, Mother secretly took me out to wander the streets. Then, out of nowhere, a man and a woman stepped into our path. The man stared at my mother, his eyes turning red. Emmeline? The woman's gaze locked on me. She grabbed the man's sleeve, suddenly frantic. Cedric, look. Those eyes, that face. She's our daughter, Rosalind. She rushed toward me with her arms open wide. Rosalind, I'm your mother. I was so scared that I scrambled behind my mother. Mother pulled me behind her without a word. Her face gave nothing away. The man approached, looking guilty and full of himself at the same time. Emmeline, it must have been hard on you all these years, raising my daughter with Seraphina so well. Now that I've returned to the capital, I'll make it up to you. I still remember the promise we made, our betrothal. But Seraphina is already my lawful wife, so I'm afraid you'll have to settle for being a concubine. I was stunned. My father was the reigning emperor. My mother was the empress. What in the world was this man talking about? Chapter 1. Mother? I tugged at her sleeve. Mother gently touched the top of my head, her voice perfectly even. I believe this gentleman and his wife have mistaken me for someone else. I do not know either of you, let alone anything about a daughter. She moved to lead me away, but the man stepped forward and blocked our path. Emmeline, I know you resent me. It was wrong of me to leave nothing but a letter before my wedding and disappear. I know that. He paused, as if waiting for her to soften. But you have to understand, Seraphina and I are truly in love. You can't force something that isn't there. You've always been gracious and understanding, so I'm sure you can see that. The woman called Seraphina finally pulled her gaze away from me and turned to my mother. A flash of smugness crossed her eyes before she quickly rearranged her face into something pitiful and delicate. Emmeline, all those years Cedric and I spent away, not a single moment passed where we didn't think of you and Rosalind. Now that we've returned, our family can finally be whole again. She reached for me once more. Rosalind, let your mother get a good look at you. I dodged her hand and blurted out, my name isn't Rosalind. My name is Liera. The man laughed, and there was something almost tender in it. Liera? He looked at my mother. Is that the pet name you gave her? That's sweet of you, Emmeline. Once we get home, I'll make her an official family member. I was more confused than ever. My name was already recorded in the hall of the royal lineage. Father had held me in his arms and presented me there himself. Mother spoke again, a thread of impatience slipping into her voice. Cedric Ashworth, you have the wrong person. She is not your daughter. Cedric's brow furrowed, and he was about to respond when Seraphina dropped to her knees with tears streaming down her face. Emmeline, I know you hate me. Everything is my fault, all of it. I shouldn't have fallen in love with Cedric. I shouldn't have carried his child. Her voice broke. I shouldn't have run away with him the night before your wedding. But Rosalind is my child, my own blood. You can't keep me from my own daughter just because you hate me. I looked up sharply at Mother. Under the warm glow of the lights, her face was so pale that it was nearly translucent. Cedric reached down and helped Seraphina to her feet at just the right moment, then turned to Mother with a look of quiet disapproval. Emmeline, Seraphina has already humbled herself completely. The past is the past. We came back to the capital to make things right. A child shouldn't grow up without her real parents. And you deserve someone to take care of you, too. I was shaking with fury, and the words tumbled out before I could stop them. My mother already has someone. My father is the... Liera, Mother cut me off. She looked down at me and gave a small, quiet shake of her head. Chapter 2. The rest of my words died in my throat. It hit me then that Mother and I had snuck out of the palace. We had no handmaidens, no guards. If anyone found out who we were, we would be in real danger. Still, it was so unfair. Cedric watched my mother scold me and actually looked pleased. He carried on as though it were settled. So you do have some sense, after all. You know this isn't the place to talk. Let's go somewhere quieter and sort this out properly. The child deserves to know who her real parents are. As he spoke, he reached out to grab my arm. Don't touch me. I shrieked and scrambled behind Mother. Mother lifted her hand and blocked his reach with one calm, deliberate motion. Mr. Ashworth, mind yourself. Cedric's hand hung frozen in the air. His expression darkened. Emmeline Sinclair, I'm being generous here. Don't push your luck. I walked away once. I can take my daughter and walk away again, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Seraphina stopped crying too, her eyes darting between Mother and me with no trace of sadness left in them, only a cold, calculating look that made my skin crawl. Mother drew a deep breath and straightened herself. Fine. Then let us go somewhere else and talk. Mother took my hand and walked quickly away from the crowds, ducking into a narrow alley. Cedric and Seraphina followed us in, one in front and one behind, blocking the way out. Seraphina spoke first. The grief was gone from her voice, replaced by a barely contained excitement. Emmeline, there's no one else around now, so we can speak freely. I really should thank you for everything back then. Mother tucked me further behind her. Thank me for what? For being foolish enough to hide you, my own half-sister who claimed she'd been violated and gotten pregnant, in the country estate. For looking after you hand and foot. For brewing tonics for you every single day with my own hands because I worried the pregnancy was hard on you. Seraphina covered her mouth and laughed. The sound was sharp and grating in the darkness. You remember it all so well. That's right, the bone broth, the herbal remedies, all the finest things. Every time I drank them in front of Cedric, he'd say what a kind soul you were. She drew out the words, kind soul, pressing down on each one, slow and deliberate. Cedric cleared his throat and looked away, visibly uncomfortable. But he quickly turned back, his brow furrowed. Emmeline, there's no need to dredge up the past. Seraphina didn't have a choice back then. An unmarried woman with child. If anyone found out, it would have been a death sentence. You helped her. I haven't forgotten that. That's exactly why I'm offering you a proper place by my side now. A proper place? As a concubine? I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted iron. Then Mother laughed, low and quiet. One of you was my betrothed, promised to me before we were even born. The other was my half-sister, the one I raised and looked after since she was small. And right before my wedding, the two of you gave me quite the surprise. She paused, and every word that followed landed like a shard of ice shattering against stone. You left a letter saying you refused to be tied down, and wanted to chase true love. On my wedding day, the only news I received was that my betrothed had eloped with my half-sister and left behind a daughter. I was the eldest legitimate daughter of the Prime Minister, and overnight, I became the biggest joke in the entire capital. The alley went dead silent. I stood there, stunned. I had never heard any of this before. Father and Mother loved each other deeply. There was no one else in the court but her. I had always believed that Mother's life had been this happy from the very beginning. I never knew someone had hurt her like this, that someone had humiliated her in front of the whole world. Chapter 3. My heart twisted so painfully that I could barely breathe. All I could do was reach out and hold Mother's ice-cold fingers as tightly as my small hands could manage. A flash of embarrassment crossed Cedric's face, but it was quickly swallowed by anger. So what? Would you have me give up the woman I truly love for the sake of some arranged marriage? Even the Emperor himself defied every advisor in his court to keep his heart devoted solely to the Empress. How is it wrong for me to do the same? Emmeline Sinclair, I never loved you. Marrying you was nothing more than our parents' arrangement. Seraphina and I chose each other. As for the gossip, it's been years. Who even remembers any of it? Mother's gaze drifted across Seraphina's smug face, then back to Cedric. Her eyes looked hollow. And when you left that newborn child with me, telling me that as the intended wife and that it was my duty to raise her. Was that also because of your great love for each other? Emmeline. Seraphina's voice turned shrill. You raised Rosalind for 5 years. Don't tell me you feel nothing for her. You're only bringing up the past because you want to keep my daughter for yourself. She jabbed a finger in my direction. Look at her. She's grown up so well, so clever. You clearly poured your heart into raising her. That's why you don't want to give her back. Give me back my daughter. She tried to lunge at me again, but Cedric held her back. Cedric turned to Mother, his tone heavy with threat. Emmeline, I don't want to make a scene. We're taking the child. As for you, you'll come back to the estate with me. Seraphina is the legal wife, and you will show her respect. This is the best you can hope for. Consider it repayment for the 5 years you spent raising Rosalind. Repayment? They had broken Mother's heart, turned her into a laughingstock, dumped a baby on her doorstep, and vanished for 5 years without a single word. Now, they had come back and expected Mother to be a concubine, to bow to the very woman who had ruined her life. What kind of repayment was that? I could not hold it in any longer. I threw myself out from behind Mother and screamed with everything I had, "You're lying. I'm not your Rosalind. My father is the Emperor. My mother is the Empress. You're horrible people. Both of you." The alley fell silent once more. Cedric and Seraphina stared at me, looking at me the way one would look at a child spouting nonsense. Then Seraphina burst out laughing. She laughed so hard she doubled over, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. "Oh, Emmeline, did you hear that? What have you been filling this child's head with? You must have lost your mind completely." Cedric shook his head, looking at Mother with a mixture of disappointment and pity. "Emmeline, have you truly gone this far? Making up lies like this just to keep the child? Do you have any idea that impersonating royalty is a crime punishable by the execution of your entire family?" He stopped hesitating. He strode forward and reached straight for Mother's wrist. "You need to come to your senses. You're coming with me. Don't touch my mother." I screamed and tried to shove him away, but he brushed me aside with barely any effort, and I fell to the ground. Mother's expression changed instantly. She rushed to my side, pulling me up and checking me over for injuries. Cedric stood there, thwarted. A flush of anger and humiliation crept across his face. Seraphina saw her chance. She dropped the act entirely, moved in close to Mother, and lowered her voice. "Emmeline, did you really think I begged you to take in my daughter for the child's sake?" Mother's hands tightened into fists. "I did it on purpose. Seraphina smiled, wide and triumphant. When Cedric and I eloped, I left the baby with you deliberately. I wanted to make sure you'd never be able to hold your head up again. Chapter 4. Seraphina stepped closer, pushing her face right up to Mother's. The legitimate daughter, raising a child for me, the illegitimate one. Just thinking about it makes me feel wonderful. I was trembling with rage, but Mother gripped my hand tight and would not let me move. Cedric frowned. Seraphina, that's enough. Then, he sighed and turned to Mother, his tone laced with reproach. Emmeline, I can allow you to continue raising Rosalind. But Seraphina is the legal wife. Once you enter the household, you will serve her and pay her the proper respects. Tears flooded my eyes all at once. I broke free and rushed forward, kicking Seraphina in the leg as hard as I could. You're a horrible person. Don't you dare talk to my mother like that. Seraphina shrieked and swung her hand straight at my face. Mother pulled me behind her. The slap landed across Mother's cheek with a sharp crack. I froze. Mother's head snapped to the side. A red handprint bloomed against her pale skin, but she held me tightly against her chest, refusing to let go. Cedric frowned again. Seraphina, don't hit her. However, Seraphina was already crying. She spun around to face the crowd that was beginning to gather, wailing at the top of her lungs. Someone tell me if this is fair. She stole my daughter. My own child calls her mother and won't even look at me. So I slapped her once. Is that so wrong? The crowd stirred. Stealing someone's child is wrong. She looks so proper, too. Who'd have thought she'd do something like that? No wonder the woman hit her. She deserved it. Hearing those words felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. It felt so heavy that I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream that my mother was the empress, that I was a princess, and that none of them had any right to say such things. However, not a single one of them would have believed me. All I could do was cling to Mother's leg and sob. Mother, let's go. Please, let's just go. Mother looked down at me and gently patted my back. Cedric walked over. This time, he reached out to pull me straight from Mother's arms. His voice was strangely, almost unervingly patient. Rosalind, come home with your father. Your foster mother isn't fit to raise you. From now on, I'll buy you all the sweets you want. How does that sound? His hand closed around my arm, and he pulled hard. I wrapped my arms around Mother's neck and held on with everything I had. Mother held on to me just as fiercely. Cedric's voice went cold. Emmeline, let go. Rosalind is an Ashworth by blood. What right do you have to keep her? Mother raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes were rimmed red, but not a single tear fell. Cedric, listen to me. The most foolish thing I have ever done in my life was to have once treated you with genuine kindness. Cedric went still. Seraphina sneered from the side. Emmeline, what good does saying any of that do? We're taking Rosalind today. That's final. She reached for me. I shrank back as far as I could, but Cedric was pulling my arm and Seraphina was gripping my collar. Together, their hands were like iron clamps, dragging me out of Mother's embrace. Mother. I screamed. Mother was shoved to the ground. I dangled in the air, legs kicking wildly, my voice so raw from crying it was barely a sound anymore. Let me go. Let me go. Seraphina held me by the collar, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Don't be scared, Rosalind. Your real mother is taking you home. From now on, you'll be the young lady of a noble house. That's 100 times better than living with some abandoned woman. I sank my teeth into her hand. She screamed and let go. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my knees, but I did not stop. I scrambled to my feet and ran straight back to Mother. Chapter 5. Mother was pulling herself up from the ground. Her hair had come loose, and her clothes were streaked with dust. I threw myself into her arms, shaking all over. Mother held me and gently patted my back. Cedric walked over, his brows so deeply furrowed that they looked carved into his face. Emmeline, why put yourself through this? The child is suffering with you. She'd be better off back with the Ashworth family. Mother did not acknowledge him. She simply held me, pressed her lips close to my ear, and whispered in a voice so quiet only I could hear. Don't be afraid, Liera. Your father must have already noticed we are gone. He will come for us soon. I nodded hard and buried my face in the crook of her neck. Seraphina came over, cradling her bitten hand, her eyes burning with hatred. That little wretch is just as ungrateful as Emmeline. She turned to Cedric and snapped, Cedric, what are you standing there for? Take the child. Cedric stepped forward and grabbed my arm, pulling with force this time. I locked my arms around Mother's neck and refused to let go. Mother held me just as tightly. Let go. Cedric snarled through gritted teeth. No. Mother's voice came out through clenched teeth. Seraphina rushed in too and began prying Mother's fingers apart. Her nails dug into the flesh, and beads of blood rose on the back of Mother's hands, but Mother would not release her grip. Someone, help. Please help. Seraphina suddenly cried out to the crowd of onlookers. This madwoman stole my daughter. Please, help me get my child back. The crowd stirred. A few people edged closer. That's terrible. The real mother shows up and she still won't give the child back. Someone should help. Look at how hard that poor child is crying. Several men exchanged glances, rolled up their sleeves, and walked over. Mother's face went pale. Don't you dare. I am. Before she could finish, a hand was already on her shoulder. Hey, the child's real mother wants her back. Just hand her over. Exactly. Stealing a child and acting like she's in the right? Mother tried to dodge them, but she was holding me and could not free her hands. Those hands pulled and shoved at her from every direction. Some grabbed her arms, others tugged at her clothes. Let go of my mother. I screamed as I tried to kick and hit them, but I was too small. My strength was nothing against theirs. Mother's forehead struck the wall. Blood ran down the side of her face. Her clothes were torn, and her hair had fallen loose around her shoulders, but her arms stayed locked around me. Cedric seized the moment and wrenched me free with one powerful pull. Mother. I was ripped from her arms and thrown to the ground. Mother lunged for me like she was possessed, but the men held her back. They pinned her shoulders, grinning among themselves. Well, she's a feisty one. Easy now, easy. The child's going back to her real family. It's not like they're going to mistreat her. One hand reached toward Mother's face. Another slid toward her waist. Then, from the mouth of the alley, came the sound of boots hitting the ground in perfect unison. The clash of armor rang through the air, and torchlight blazed across the walls. The Royal Guards. It's the Royal Guards. The crowd screamed and scattered in every direction. The men who had been pinning Mother down barely had time to react before they were kicked clean off their feet and sent crashing into the walls with cries of pain. A golden banner unfurled in the firelight. A royal carriage came to a stop, and a figure draped in gold stepped out. Seraphina's hand went rigid at her side. Cedric spun around, the color draining from his face. I saw that familiar face. Father. The morning after the Festival of Lights, the Imperial Palace was smothered in a heavy, breathless silence. In the Empress's private chambers, the scent of burning sandalwood drifted from a bronze burner, coiling toward the carved rafters like pale silk. The warmth of the room did little to dispel the chill that seemed to have settled deep into the bones of those who dwelt within. Emmeline sat motionless before her bronze mirror. The reflection staring back was pale, her dark hair draped over her shoulders like a mourning veil. On her left cheek, the faint shadow of a red handprint remained, a crude, violent mark that looked entirely out of place on the skin of the nation's mother. A basin of warm water sat on the rosewood table nearby. Beside it stood Julian, the emperor. He did not allow the handmaidens to touch her. Instead, the ruler of the empire knelt on one knee beside her stool, his large, calloused hands gently wringing out a white silk cloth. His movements were incredibly slow, as if he were handling the most fragile glass. Does it hurt? Julian's voice was low, carrying a raspy, gravelly quality that only appeared when his anger had bypassed the point of shouting and settled into a deadly, freezing calm. Emmeline smiled faintly, though the movement made her wince. The physical sting has faded, Julian. It is only the absurdity of it all that lingers. Julian did not answer immediately. He pressed the warm cloth against her cheek, his thumb tracing the edge of her jawline. His eyes, usually as deep and unreadable as an ancient lake, were dark with a terrifying intensity. I should have had them executed on the cobblestones last night, he murmured. The guards would have done it before their blood could even stain your slippers. No, Emmeline said softly, placing her fingers over his back. If you had killed them there, they would have died thinking they were martyrs of some tragic, forbidden romance. They would have believed they were being torn apart by a cruel tyrant. I want them to see, Julian. I want them to look at the wreckage of their own lives and realize that they did not choose a grand destiny, they chose their own ruin. The door to the chamber creaked open slightly, and a small, hesitant figure slipped through. Liara stood by the threshold, her eyes wide and red from a night of fitful sleep. She still clutched the edge of her father's gold-embroidered cloak, which she had refused to let go of since they returned to the palace. Mother, Liara whispered. In an instant, the coldness in Julian's eyes vanished, replaced by a warm, paternal softness. He stood up and held out his arms. Liara ran to him, and he lifted her effortlessly, cradling her against his shoulder before sitting beside Emmeline. Emmeline reached out, pulling Liara close to her chest. Are you still frightened, my star? Liara shook her head, burying her face in Emmeline's neck, though her small shoulders trembled slightly. I'm not scared. But I was so angry, Mother. They called you a foster mother. They said you stole me. They didn't know anything about how you held me when I had the winter fever, or how Father carries us through the gardens. They spoke as if we were characters in a cheap play they wrote. Julian kissed the top of the young princess's head, his jaw tightening. They will never speak to you again, Liera. And the world will soon know exactly who you are, and what those monsters did. At that moment, the chief eunuch, Harrison, entered the room, his head bowed so low his forehead nearly touched his hands. Your Imperial Majesties, Harrison whispered, his voice trembling. Lord Sinclair, the Prime Minister, has been kneeling outside the Meridian Gate since the third watch of the night. He begs for an audience with the Empress. He has brought his wife, the secondary consort, bound in chains. Emmeline's gaze cooled. The name Sinclair was a phantom that had haunted her youth. My father, she murmured, a bitter edge touching her lips. He was always so quick to calculate. When I was disgraced on my wedding day, he closed the gates of the Sinclair estate and declared he had only one daughter, Seraphina. Now, he kneels in the frost. Julian looked at her, his expression giving nothing away. Shall I send him to the dungeons to join them? Emmeline rose from her seat, her posture straight, her chin lifting with the natural, quiet dignity that had made her the most respected woman in the Empire. No. Let us go to the main hall. I want to see how far a father will crawl to save his own pride. The Grand Phoenix Hall was vast, its floor of polished black obsidian reflecting the pale light of the winter morning. Lord Arthur Sinclair, the Prime Minister, was a man who had built his career on being indispensable to 3 successive reigns. He was a master of words, a politician who could weave excuses out of thin air. But today, as he knelt on the cold obsidian floor, his elaborate silk robes offered him no warmth. Behind him knelt Lady Marilyn, his favored concubine who had been elevated to the status of secondary wife after Emmeline's mother passed away. Marilyn was stripped of her jewelry, her hair disheveled, her hands bound behind her back with coarse hemp rope. She was weeping silently, her face swollen with terror. The heavy thud of the Imperial staff echoed through the hall. His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor. Her Imperial Majesty, the Empress. Arthur prostrated himself, pressing his forehead against the cold stone. Long live the Emperor, long live the Empress. May you rule for 10,000 years. Julian strode to the throne, his hand firmly holding Emmeline's as he guided her to sit beside him. The golden dragons embroidered on Julian's robe seemed to shimmer with a dangerous light. He did not tell Arthur to rise. For several minutes, the only sound in the grand hall was the heavy breathing of the Sinclair couple. Finally, Emmeline spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it filled the vast space with the weight of a heavy winter frost. Rise, Lord Sinclair. Arthur slowly straightened his back, though he kept his eyes firmly fixed on the floor. Your Majesty, my eldest daughter. Silence, Julian's voice cut through the air like a sword stroke. Who gave you permission to call the Empress your daughter? 5 years ago, when she stood before your gates, rejected and humiliated by the elopement of your favored child and her betrothed, you barred the doors. You told the capital she was dead. To the Sinclair family. Where was your fatherly affection then, Prime Minister? Arthur's face turned gray. He cast a frantic look at Emmeline, searching for any trace of the gentle, compliant girl he had ignored for decades. He found none. Your Majesty, I was blind. I was misled by this wicked woman. Arthur turned and pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Marilyn, who shrieked in terror. Marilyn hid the truth from me. She told me that Emmeline had planned the elopement to escape the marriage. I did not know. I did not know that Seraphina had stolen the betrothed and left a dying bastard on our doorstep to ruin Emmeline's reputation. You did not know? Emmeline asked, her voice dangerously soft. Or did you simply not care? Seraphina was your favorite. She was vivacious, clever, and Marilyn knew exactly how to flatter your vanity. I was merely the daughter of your deceased first wife, a quiet reminder of a marriage you resented. When Cedric Ashworth eloped with Seraphina, you saw an opportunity to rid yourself of a useless daughter while keeping the Ashworth alliance through the back door. Emmeline. I beg you. Marilyn suddenly cried out, dragging herself forward on her knees until she was stopped by the crossed halberds of the Imperial guards. Seraphina is your sister. She was foolish, she was blinded by love. But she didn't mean to hurt you. She was young. Young? Emmeline laughed, a sound devoid of any mirth. She was 19. Old enough to scheme. Old enough to hide in my country estate, taking the tonics I brewed with my own hands to keep her pregnancy safe. Old enough to elope the night before my wedding, leaving a note that branded me a pathetic, abandoned woman. And she was old enough to leave a dying infant in my room, hoping that When the child died under my care, I would be accused of murder. The hall fell into a terrifying silence. Arthur's breath hitched. A dying infant? Did Seraphina not tell you? Emmeline leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Marilyn's pale face. She told Cedric they left the baby with me because I was kind. But the truth was far more malicious, wasn't it, Marilyn? You and your daughter wanted me dead or ruined. You knew the child was born premature and weak. You expected her to die within days, leaving me to face the wrath of the Ashworth family and the court for neglecting a newborn. Marilyn's lips trembled, but no words came out. The secret she had buried for 5 years had been dragged into the blinding light of the imperial court. But fate had other plans, Emmeline continued, her voice softening as she thought of the past. The child did die. She died in my arms on the 3rd night. Despite every effort I made to save her. I buried her under the pear tree in the backyard of the country estate. But it was on that very night of grief that Julian found me. Julian took Emmeline's hand, his fingers locking with hers. I was a prince. Then, hunting near the border of the country estate when my horse threw me. I was injured, and the eldest daughter of the Sinclair family took me in, not knowing who I was. She nursed me back to health, her hands still soiled from burying a child that wasn't hers. Julian looked down at Arthur, his gaze cold enough to freeze water. The Sinclair family threw away a pearl to cherish a handful of mud. And now, you dare to come to my court, begging for the life of the woman who dared to strike my empress? Arthur fell to his knees again, weeping. Your Majesty, I resign. I will surrender my title, my land, everything. Only spare the Sinclair line. Do not let the treason of Seraphina wipe out our entire clan. Resign? Julian sneered. You think your resignation is enough to pay for the blood on the Empress's cheek? Arthur Sinclair, you have failed as a minister. And you have failed as a father. Here is my decree, the Sinclair family is stripped of all noble titles and properties. Your assets will be seized and distributed to the orphanages of the capital. You, Arthur, will be exiled to the northern border to serve as a common laborer for the rest of your days. As for Marilyn, Julian's eyes flicked to the bound woman. She will be kept in the cold palace dungeons. She will watch her daughter's trial, and she will witness the end of the legacy she sacrificed her soul to build. No. No. Marilyn screamed as the guard seized her by the arms, dragging her away. Her fingernails scratched against the polished stone, leaving faint, desperate streaks before she was pulled out of the hall. Arthur sat frozen, his spirit completely broken. He looked up at Emmeline last time, his lips moving as if to say her name, but the guards did not give him the chance. They hoisted him up and marched him out of the palace, leaving only the echoing silence of their footsteps. Emmeline closed her eyes, letting out a breath she felt she had been holding for 5 long years. It is done, she whispered. No, my love, Julian said, his voice gentle but firm as he kissed her knuckles. It is only the beginning. The stage is set for the main actors. The royal dungeons were a subterranean maze of damp stone, iron bars, and the suffocating smell of mildew and old blood. In the deepest wing, where the light of the sun never penetrated, Cedric Ashworth sat on a pile of rotten straw. His once elegant silk robes were torn and stained with grease and mud. His hands, which had once held the finest scholarly brushes and rode the most expensive steeds, were covered in dirt and small, weeping sores. Across the narrow, iron-barred corridor sat Seraphina. She was in a similar state of disarray, but her spirit had not been crushed by the dampness. It had turned into a frantic, wild madness. She paced the length of her tiny cell, her fingers clawing at the stone walls until her nails bled. It's a mistake, she muttered, her voice high and reedy. It has to be a mistake. How could Emmeline be the Empress? She was a quiet, boring girl. She didn't know how to catch a man's eye. I was the one everyone loved. I was the one who deserved the crown. Cedric did not look at her. He stared at his own dirty hands, his mind replaying the events of the previous night over and over again. What I'd like to know, Mr. Ashworth, is when exactly my princess became your daughter? The Emperor's voice still echoed in his ears, heavy and terrifying. Cedric had spent 5 years in the provinces, living a life that was far from the grand romance he had envisioned. When he eloped with Seraphina, he believed he was a hero in a legendary tale of forbidden love. He thought he was defying a cold, arranged marriage to chase his true soulmate. But reality had been harsh. Without the wealth of the Sinclair and Ashworth families, their true love had quickly soured. Seraphina was demanding, temperamental, and entirely useless when it came to managing a household. She had constantly screamed at him, blaming him for their poverty, while he had grown to resent her sharp tongue and endless vanity. They had returned to the capital hoping to use their daughter, Rosalind, whom they believed Emmeline had raised into a beautiful, wealthy young lady, as a bargaining chip to force their way back into high society. Cedric had truly believed he was doing Emmeline a favor by offering her a place as his concubine. He had thought his old feelings for her, though cold, were a generous gift. What a fool he had been. Seraphina, Cedric said, his voice hollow and dead. Seraphina stopped her pacing, turning her wild eyes toward him. What? What is it, Cedric? Are you going to sit there like a coward? Call the guards. Tell them who we are. My father is the Prime Minister. He won't let them keep us here. Your father has been stripped of his title and exiled, a cold, smooth voice echoed down the corridor. The heavy iron door at the end of the hallway creaked open. A group of Imperial guards entered, carrying lanterns that cast long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. In the center of the light walked Emmeline, dressed in a simple but elegant deep blue gown, her hair pinned back with a single jade hairpin. Behind her walked Julian, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his sword. Seraphina gasped, throwing herself against the iron bars of her cell. Emmeline. Emmeline, you came. Tell them to let me out. I'm your sister. We share the same blood. You can't let your husband treat us like this. Emmeline stopped in front of Seraphina's cell. Her expression was completely blank, as if she were looking at a stranger, or worse, a minor nuisance. Sister? Emmeline repeated the word softly. The sister who stole my betrothed? The sister who left her dying child on my bed? The sister who, just last night, dug her nails into my hands and tried to steal my daughter? She isn't your daughter. Seraphina shrieked, her voice cracking. Rosalind is my child. I gave birth to her. You stole her from me because you were jealous that I had Cedric's love. Your child died 5 years ago, Seraphina, Emmeline said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the damp air like a knife. She died because you ran away through a winter storm immediately after giving birth, refusing to let a physician see her because you were terrified of being caught. You wrapped her in cheap linen and left her in a freezing room. She died of a lung fever. I buried her with my own hands. Seraphina's eyes widened. No, no, you're lying. You're just saying that to hurt me. If Rosalind died, then who is that girl? The one with your eyes, the one who looks so much like. She stopped, her gaze shifting to Julian, who stood beside Emmeline like an immovable mountain. Liera is my biological daughter, Emmeline said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for a brief moment. She is the daughter of the Emperor and the Empress. She carries the royal blood of this empire. And you dared to lay your filthy hands on her. Cedric felt a cold sweat break out across his back. He crawled forward, pressing his face against the iron bars of his own cell, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and regret. Emmeline. Please, Cedric begged, his eyes filling with tears. I didn't. No. I swear to you, I didn't know any of this. Seraphina told me the baby was healthy when we left her. She told me you had agreed to raise her. I was blind. Emmeline. I was deceived by her. Cedric. Seraphina screamed, turning on him with fury. How dare you blame me? You were the one who wanted to run. You said you couldn't bear to touch Emmeline's hand. You said she was as dull as dishwater. Because you poisoned my mind. Cedric roared back, his voice cracking with desperation. You came to me crying, telling me you were pregnant, telling me you would kill yourself if I married her. You planned the whole thing. You wanted to ruin her because you hated that she was the legitimate daughter and you were just the daughter of a concubine. Emmeline watched them tear each other apart, her expression remaining entirely unmoved. This was the grand, passionate love that had ruined her youth. This was the romance that had made her the laughingstock of the capital. It was nothing but a fragile house of cards, built on jealousy, lies, and vanity, now collapsing under the first gust of real trouble. How pathetic, Emmeline murmured. Both Cedric and Seraphina went silent, looking at her with wide, terrified eyes. You threw away your lives for this? Emmeline asked, looking at Cedric. You, the heir of the Ashworth family, a scholar of great promise, threw away your family's honor for a woman you now despise. And you, Seraphina, ruined your own sister's wedding day just to satisfy your petty envy, only to end up living in poverty and dying in a dark cell. Emmeline, please, Cedric wept, reaching his dirty hands through the bars toward her feet. I still remember our childhood. I remember the promise we made. Under the peach blossoms. I can still fulfill it. I will make you my wife. No, I don't care about Seraphina anymore. I will divorce her. I will serve you, I will be your most loyal servant. Just save me from this place. Julian stepped forward, his boot coming down heavily on Cedric's fingers. A sickening crack echoed through the corridor, and Cedric screamed in agony, pulling his hand back and cradling his broken fingers against his chest. You dare to speak of promises to my wife? Julian's voice was a low growl, his eyes flashing with a deadly light. You are nothing but a speck of dust, Cedric Ashworth. The only reason you are still breathing is because the Empress wished to speak to you one last time. But do not mistake her mercy for weakness. Julian looked at the guards. Prepare the court. Tomorrow, the trial will begin. The entire capital will witness the judgment of those who dared to assault the Empress and threaten the Princess of the Empire. As Emmeline and Julian turned to leave, Seraphina began to laugh. It was a high, hysterical sound that echoed off the damp stone walls, turning into a sob, and then back into a laugh. You think you've won, Emmeline? Seraphina screamed after them, her nails clawing at her own face, drawing thin lines of blood. You're still just a quiet, boring girl. You only got lucky. You only found a man who would play the hero for you. If I had met the Emperor first, if I had been the one. The iron door slammed shut, cutting off her voice, leaving her alone in the darkness with her own madness and the broken, weeping man she had once called her true love. The day of the trial, the streets of the capital were packed so tightly that not a single carriage could pass. The citizens of the capital, who loved gossip above all else, had gathered around the Supreme Judicial Court. The news had spread like wildfire. The infamous elopement scandal of 5 years ago had returned, but this time, the abandoned eldest daughter of the Sinclair family was none other than the reigning Empress, and her former tormentors were being tried for treason. Inside the grand courtroom, the atmosphere was solemn and heavy. The high ministers of the court sat in rows, their faces grave. In the center of the room stood 2 wooden cages, inside of which were Cedric and Seraphina. Both were chained, their heads bowed, looking like broken animals. On the high dais sat the Emperor and the Empress. Julian wore his formal court robes of deep black and gold, the imperial crown resting on his brow. Beside him, Emmeline sat in her full Empress regalia, her head adorned with the magnificent golden phoenix crown, its ruby eyes shimmering in the torchlight. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly unreachable. The Chief Justice stepped forward, unfolding a long scroll. By imperial decree, we open the trial of Cedric Ashworth and Seraphina Sinclair, accused of high treason, assault on the Empress, attempted abduction of the Princess, and conspiracy to defame the royal family. For the next 3 hours, the court was presented with a mountain of evidence. The physicians who had examined the dead infant 5 years ago were brought forward, testifying that the child had indeed died of neglect and severe illness within days of being abandoned. The country estate's old servants testified to Emmeline's tireless, heartbreaking efforts to save the baby, and how she had wept as she buried it. The crowd outside, listening to the heralds read the testimonies aloud, fell into a deep, ashamed silence. 5 years ago, they had mocked Emmeline. They had called her a useless, rejected woman who couldn't keep her man. Now, they realized the sheer, sickening cruelty of what had been done to her. She had been a savior to a dying child, a victim of her sister's malice, and she had borne the shame of the entire capital in silence. Cedric Ashworth, the Chief Justice called out, his voice echoing through the silent room. Do you deny these charges? Cedric knelt in his cage, his head pressed against the wooden bars. I do not deny them. I was blind. I was a fool. I beg for the Empress's mercy. Seraphina Sinclair, the Chief Justice turned to the other cage. Do you deny these charges? Seraphina did not speak. She sat on the floor of her cage, her hair covering her face, rocking back and forth as she mumbled to herself. The madness had taken over her mind completely. She was no longer capable of understanding the reality around her. The Chief Justice looked up at the imperial dais, bowing deeply. Your Imperial Majesties, the evidence is absolute. The accused have confessed, and the conspiracy is laid bare. We await your judgment. Julian turned to Emmeline, his hand gently finding hers under the wide sleeves of their robes. My Empress, the judgment is yours to give. Emmeline stood up. The golden tassels of her phoenix crown chimed softly, a sound that seemed to command the attention of every soul in the room. She looked down at the 2 people who had once defined the darkest period of her life. She felt no anger now, no desire for blood. She only felt a profound, peaceful emptiness. The ghosts of her past had finally been laid to rest. Cedric Ashworth, Emmeline's voice was clear, carrying to every corner of the silent hall. You threw away your family's honor, your duty, and your own soul. For a lie. The Ashworth family name will be stripped of all nobility, and your ancestral estates will be confiscated. You are sentenced to lifelong exile in the desolate southern swamps, where you will live out your days as a common exile, forgotten by the world. Cedric closed his eyes, a single tear cutting through the dirt on his cheek. He did not beg. He knew this was a mercy. He would live, but his life would be a slow, agonizing death of obscurity and regret. As for Seraphina, Emmeline turned her gaze to her sister. You wanted to be remembered. You wanted the capital to speak of your beauty, your passion, and your triumph over me. Therefore, you will remain in the capital. You will be placed in the imperial asylum, where the doors will remain forever locked. You will live out your days in a room with no mirrors, with only your own mind to keep you company. The capital will remember you not as a romantic heroine, but as the woman who went mad from her own greed. Seraphina did not react to the sentence. She only continued to rock back and forth, whispering a name over and over again, Rosalind. Rosalind, where is my sweet Rosalind? The gavel struck the desk with a heavy, final thud. The trial is adjourned. Execute the sentences immediately. As the guards began to wheel the cages away, the crowd outside erupted into cheers. The name of the Empress was shouted from the streets, a grand, roaring chorus of devotion that filled the capital. Emmeline sat back down on her throne. She looked at Julian, who was smiling at her with a warmth that could melt the deepest winter snow. Are you happy, Emmeline? He asked softly. She leaned her head slightly toward him, her hand tightening around his. I am at peace, Julian. The joke is finally over. 5 years passed. The memory of the trial had faded from the capital, replaced by stories of the empire's prosperity, the wisdom of the emperor, and the deep, unwavering love between the imperial couple. It was the night of the Festival of Lights once again. The imperial gardens were filled with the warm, soft glow of thousands of floating paper lanterns. The scent of sweet plum blossoms filled the cool night air, and the sound of distant music drifted over the high palace walls. Emmeline walked slowly down the stone path, her hand resting on the arm of her daughter, Liera. Liera was now 10 years old. She had grown tall and graceful, her eyes carrying the same quiet intelligence as her mother's, but with a bright, mischievous spark that she had inherited from her father. She wore a simple gown of pale pink silk, her hair tied up with a small silver ribbon. Mother, look. Liera pointed to a large, golden lantern floating near the pond. That one has a drawing of a rabbit on it. Father must have made it. Emmeline laughed, a soft, musical sound. Your father's artistic skills are lacking, but his effort is always grand. I heard that. Julian's voice came from behind them. He stepped out from the shadow of a weeping willow, carrying a wooden tray with 2 cups of warm pear wine and a small plate of sweet pastries. He had discarded his formal robes for a simple, comfortable robe of dark blue wool, looking less like a ruler of an empire and more like a devoted husband and father. He handed a pastry to Liera, who took it with a bright smile, and then handed a cup of wine to Emmeline. The ministers were complaining again today, Julian sighed, though there was a teasing light in his eyes. They say the crown princess should be spending more time studying the classics and less time riding horses with her father. And what did you tell them? Emmeline asked, taking a sip of the warm wine. I told them that if they can outride my daughter, I will consider their advice. Julian grinned, wrapping his free arm around Emmeline's waist, pulling her close against his chest. Needless to say, none of them volunteered. Liera giggled, her mouth full of pastry. They are too old and fat to ride horses anyway. Liera, Emmeline scolded gently, though she couldn't hide her smile. Do not be disrespectful to the elders. Yes, mother, Liera said dutifully, though she winked at her father. They stood together by the edge of the pond, watching the lanterns float slowly toward the dark night sky, their reflections dancing on the water's surface like 1,000 fallen stars. Emmeline looked down at the water, and for a brief moment, she remembered the cold, dark alley of 5 years ago. She remembered the fear, the pain, and the bitter taste of old betrayals. But as she felt the warmth of Julian's hand holding hers, and heard the bright, happy laughter of her daughter beside her, those shadows vanished completely. They were nothing but dried leaves, swept away by the wind, leaving only the deep, fertile earth of the life they had built together. What are you thinking about, my love? Julian whispered, his lips brushing against her temple. Emmeline turned her head, looking into his deep, devoted eyes. I was just thinking, she said softly, that the hardest thing in life is staying true to who you are. But with you beside me, Julian, it has been the easiest thing in the world. Julian smiled, his grip on her hand tightening as they stood together under the warm light of the lanterns, their shadows merging into one on the stone path. Unbroken and beautiful.